Salvate disculpai. Mi nomen est Bricus, et hudi vos dicumus Latinum, linguam Latinum. That is all I can really say in Latin. Maybe I didn't conjugate a verb or two right, but over the past few months I've been learning this spectacular language. 6 days a week I read my Lingua Latina or some other Latin piece of work, because I'm a piece of work, and it's been a wonderful experience. So the reason I wanted to learn Latin was because I felt like there was just a ton of value in learning about the classics, especially since today you have all these elitists like Elon Musk, Peter Thiel. You know, you'd be hard-pressed to find them not bring up the classics at least several times when they're giving public speeches and whatnot. So this is clearly an area that people of an upper echelon are interested in. So I was thinking, why not try to copy trade them? And then as I started to go through these works, as I started to read Herodotus, the Iliad and the Odyssey, and then just do some preliminary background research on some of these other works, it became clear that you're looking at literature and ideas that are, first and foremost, the first principles of everything that has ever come after it. And then secondly, I would argue that these might be some of the greatest people to ever live, in terms of dynamism at least. You know, these were people who had energy behind their ideas, and they weren't just doers, they weren't just quote-unquote jocks, but they were thinkers with childlike senses of imagination. You know, for instance, Caesar, a true dreamer cut down before his time, he dreamed of making a highway, a bridge across the Mediterranean. You know, this was a man with imagination, with ingenuity, who saw the world as his plaything. And I find, people like that to be inspiring, and especially nowadays when they're trying to dull the senses of men with opioids such as the iPhone, social media, and all these other things. I think there's probably some gap in, a quote-unquote market where you could do some outlandish thing that nobody thinks is possible because, nobody has the courage to do it. So that's what I love about the classics fundamentally. And then if you're going to engage with the content, there's a wonderful saying in Latin called ad fontes, to the fountains or to the source. And so it kind of builds on itself. People who study the classics develop, a knack for the language, assuming they put in the time and do diligent effort in their studying. And then also they're getting access to just this incredible class, this crash course in the human experience and what a lot of these great people all had in common. And then, even if you look at contemporary times, it's just essentially great men learning about other great men. I love the founding fathers or General Patton as an example of this. But Patton, he knew Latin. He went to West Point. He was a soldier. He became a general. And he was a man of action who understood history, and he understood his enemy. He applied the principles of the art of war, per se, very effectively. He was able to counteract the Battle of the Bulge because he knew about Frederick the Great and how he did a counterattack in winter too, and how Hitler was interested in Frederick the Great. So it's just, it all plays back to itself, essentially. And what I want to talk about in this video, other than that, which, as you can tell, I'm very inspired and excited by, is the process of learning this beautiful language called Latin. And I've got a lot of things to say about Latin as a language itself and what it used to mean. But what I found to be helpful is to use this as, I don't want to say my main course, but as an entree. For certain, I would use this as an entree. And you just read, or at least I'm reading, a chapter of this a day. And I'm on my second read through of the book now. and I am on chapter 33. I'm almost done with it. There are 35 chapters in this. And then I'm debating doing a third read through after. But this book is wonderful because it gives you a starting point for vocabulary and understanding the basic syntax of Latin. And then you can build on that with things like the Dowling method, which, another channel, Luke Ranieri Polymathy, you'd be hard pressed to go on Latin YouTube and not cross paths with that wonderful gentleman. But he recommends just writing out all of the declensions for nouns, for adjectives, pronouns. I haven't gotten to verbs yet. Those are very scary. But I've been learning them. I've been learning them as I've been reading them. What's ironic about me writing it out too, just as a little aside, when I was younger, I had this tutor. I struggled with reading and spelling. And towards the end of our 1-hour sessions where I would learn something new about, English essentially, as an incentive to spell certain words right that I had difficulty with, she would be forced to write down those words a certain number of times, really ranging from 25, and I believe I got her all the way up to 75. Children can be cruel, but what goes around comes around, I guess you could say. So it's been a wonderful experience, and Latin, I looked at some other people who were studying the language, some people who had small goals, like they just wanted to read a little bit, and then, people who want to really understand and become fluent in the language. And if you really want to read stuff fluently, then, it is going to be a lifelong commitment, and I like that about things. With boxing, for instance, I started doing that the summer of 2024, so a little more than a year ago, and that kind of changed the way I viewed things about commitment and giving everything your 100%. And so after I started doing boxing consistently, Latin became a part of my life on April 29th of this year. And it's been, just a wonderful, enriching experience. You understand, the roots of English, which maybe is of a great value if you're like some kind of philologist, but it's just cool if you're a regular guy like me that's sifting through all this stuff. And the final thing I'd like to say about Latin, I could talk more about learning it, but the final thing I'd like to say in this video is I appreciate what Latin used to represent, and that is almost like a natural way of gatekeeping people. With social media and technology, things have really become democratized, and I don't think it's for the better. There are some things that are good if you democratize, like, food, shelter, water, some other things for sure. But if you make a list, I made a list of this, you democratize the ability to produce books, the ability to create music, the ability to critique morality, and to engage in discourse. And what you find is that the quality of, I would say, 90% of these things, 99% of these things, just absolutely craters. Of course, there are the big players, there are people who are actually experienced in these genres. But ultimately, you just have, especially with something like Twitter, just this world of dilettantes. People who have a surface level, deep understanding of a subject matter, and they have the temerity to think that they can opine on something. And I'm not doing that right now, ironically enough. I'm just sharing my experience as somebody new to the language and from what I've understood about people who have been successful with it. Not really an educational video, but with Latin, at least, back in the day, it used to be that language where only the intellectual elite understood it. And I would like to see a return to that, not necessarily with Latin, with AI. I assume they could translate things, but I think it's a civilizational level threat that we're facing right now, where we don't have people who are experts actively communicating with the masses about certain ideas. And I'm not even talking about the CNN kind of expert of credentialism, but I'm talking about somebody who could necessarily be outside of that field, who just happens to study that field and happens to understand a certain field. That could be an expert. That could be somebody who supersedes, the person that goes to Yale and has a degree in it. It's kind of like what Socrates had in mind with Athens and his ideal form of government. Not necessarily men with credentials, who are quote unquote the best, but actually the best men. And so that was something interesting with Latin when I was looking into it. Just the fact that you have so many books from the Renaissance to the early Enlightenment, and of course, after the fall of Rome, just written in this language for people and for a very small section of people who could actually engage with the content. And I would just say this to close out the video, actually. My goal with learning this language, it goes all the way back to 2019. And this is going to connect everything perfectly, actually. I was a sophomore in college, and I happened to have no advisor. And so the school, they gave me this random professor. I believe she was teaching upperclassmen courses. And she was this wonderful, I think she might have been Indian or Arab, but just this wonderful small little woman. And then we just started talking, and she was very inspiring. I still remember her. We only had one conversation, but we got to talking about physics, we talked about calculus, and then Latin. And the commonality between all of these things is that they are hard, they are not easy, but throughout her life, she learned these things just so she wouldn't be afraid of them. And she recommended to me this book that I got probably the following day, Lingua Latina. And she inspired me to make it my goal at that time, and now it's my goal once more, but to read the Aeneid fluently in the language of Latin and understand all of the little kinks that come with Virgil's work. And so that kind of began my path, and it's not been a straightforward path. I would question what I'm actually an expert on. But it's my goal to be a person who has substance, who has knowledge in many different subjects. And I feel like learning Latin and then synthesizing that with the books that are written in the language would be extremely fruitful. And so to conclude with this, I would just say, be mindful of what you say. Let's not shit up our conversations. Everybody's going to do it. The bots in India are going to do it, but let's not be part of the problem. Let's be thoughtful about what we say online. Let's not pollute our American discourse with mindless chatter. Let's listen to people who we know to be smarter than us before we opine on a subject. Let's have some intellectual humility and let's learn. And once we have that expertise, then, maybe we can opine. But I would love to see some gatekeeping again. That's the big takeaway from this video. We need to gatekeep things again. But that will be it. I appreciate you all for watching. Leave a like on the video. I might make more of these, especially if you leave a like, though. And I will see you in the next one.